I've been thinking a lot about Star Wars recently. Between the ridiculous amount of prequel-centered TikToks I get recommended on my For You page,
Hello there. General Kenobi.
Rise of Skywalker being the controversy that it was, and the final season of Clone Wars coming out as I'm writing this. But it's also more than that. I grew up around Star Wars like most kids my age, but I never really got into it until I watched Clone Wars on Cartoon Network. And then this happened. And then it went away for a while. Until this happened. And that kind of solidified the fact that, yeah, this was something that I would watch in theaters whenever they came out, but it wasn't more than that. And then this one happened. Listen, I'll give a quick disclaimer and admit that I'm not a professional film critic. I took a film studies class my senior year in high school, and I like looking for meaning in books and TV shows in my free time. But that's it. I'm also not one of those Star Wars fans that swears by the original trilogy like it's the only good thing ever produced, because I think there's good in the other ones too. I'll even go on record saying that neither 4, 5, nor 6 are my favorite Star Wars movie, even though they're great. That doesn't mean that I'm going to give you the most well-thought-out reason for why this means more to me than but I can try. I know that there are tons of people who have already created content on the same subject, and they're all probably smarter than me. I'll link their stuff down below. But for now, let's talk about Oh, wait. So, it's no stretch to say that Star Wars is one of, if not the most popular franchises out there. A lot of people like it. Like, a lot of people. And I mean, what's not to love? The story of a young white guy following the hero's journey step by step with lovable side characters, except, oh yeah, there's also space wizards. And he has a sword made out of light. Throw that in with one of the most iconic twists of all times, and boom, you have a foolproof recipe for success. And then the prequels.
Do it.
Saying that people were disappointed would probably be an understatement. And yeah, as much fun as I do have reciting the entirety of Revenge of the Sith from memory, you can't argue with the backlash. I mean, before the internet finally came around and turned it into an ironically loved, meme-producing darling, people hated these 3 movies. Hayden Christensen's career has never recovered. These movies showed a very different side to Star Wars, one that, in direct contrast to the rundownness of Tatooine and the pre-existing struggle of the Rebels, displayed high-tech and cold environments like Coruscant and the Naboo Palace, and gave us an order of Jedi that are borderline more powerful than the government they serve. I don't know, guys, I'm not here to talk about the prequels, I'm just trying to get across the point that this set of movies took something that people had already fallen in love with and fundamentally changed it. It showed a different side of Star Wars canon that people just hated. They didn't want politics or campy acting or Jar Jar. They wanted something that they already knew to be Star Wars. So when Disney picked her up from Lucas and made what is now widely known as, oh yeah, the one sequel that's basically just a play-by-play of A New Hope, oh yeah, that one. Then, yeah, no shit, it made over $2 billion. That was the Star Wars that people knew and fell in love with. Little desert child with lovable side characters, a snarky pilot, and a gorgeous love interest, a scrappy rebellion that they could root for. Classic Star Wars. So the next year, when the next Star Wars movie was coming out, and it was going to be a spin-off about the rebellion that everybody already loved, with a big ensemble of hopefully lovable characters, people were a little nervous, but like, Alan Tudyk is in it. I mean, how crazy could it be?
This is a rebellion, isn't it? I rebel.
Oh. Oh, no. So yeah, people didn't like Jen, but hey, that can be fixed. They did some massive reshoots, and from what I understand, the final product is much different than what we got in the first teaser. So, being put at ease, the fanbase came to see Rogue One, and it became immediately clear that this wasn't classic Star Wars. Yeah, there are still lived-in and grimy planets like Jedha and the Rebellion we already know, and a big cast of fun characters. But it's different. I'd argue that this movie is the best-looking Star Wars film, rivaled only by Last Jedi, which, oh, hey, look at that, also not the most loved. But beyond visuals, it shows a very different side of the Rebellion, one filled with murderers and ex-Empire workers and cynics. This isn't the story of a hopeful young 20-something who plans to take on the entire Empire with one well-placed blaster shot, but people who are almost certain that by the end of their battle they're going to be dead. And that's what happens. It's sad. All the characters you just spent 2 hours rooting for die. So tell me why it works. I know I just harped on the prequels for being so unrecognizable as Star Wars that people flipped their shit, but for some reason, Rogue One does it better. You can credit it to just having better writing or directing or actors, but honestly, I think it's just because it's the middle ground. You had your pendulum that swung really far one way, then really far the other, and then back the first way, and now here you are. It's got the elements that you'd expect, but it's still different. It's a little more grown up, and it plays with the ideas that people haven't really talked about in universe. It's a spin-off for a reason. It wants to dive a little deeper, and yeah, maybe it's not as much as a popcorn blockbuster as Force Awakens, but don't we want something new? I mean, it works for me. Tell me if you've heard this one before. Oh, yeah, I like the effects, I think they're good, but the uncanny valley with Tarkin and Leia is too much. In case you're not familiar with the term, the uncanny valley is a theory that basically AI or androids can only get so realistic, and even if it looks perfect, there's a part of your brain that will still tell you that it's not real. I know that there was a lot of backlash with Tarkin for not looking great, and sure, I can see it now, but back in 2016, when I still hadn't fallen down the rabbit hole of Star Wars hell, I barely even remembered Tarkin from the movies, much less that the actor had passed away. So I wasn't really aware of the fact that it wasn't a real guy. I just didn't get why the movie was focusing on him so much. And as for Leia, when I saw this movie, the news had just broken that Carrie Fisher had passed away. Like I said, I wasn't the biggest Star Wars person, but I still remembered her. And I knew that beyond just those movies, she was in TV shows that I loved and was a huge political activist that I respected, and her mom was in one of my all-time favorite movies. I loved Carrie Fisher. I miss Carrie Fisher. So seeing her at the end saying that in 2016, a year of tremendous turmoil, that there was hope, right after she passed away, it meant something. It still means something. I watched Rogue One recently, which is why I'm writing this now, and I teared up at the end when she came on screen. I don't care how good or bad the effects are, I know what it meant. That clip is one of the most important things in all of Star Wars to me. Who's your favorite Star Wars character? I'm willing to bet they're part of a trilogy, or at least a trio. You have your Luke and Leia and Han, and you have your Padme and Anakin and Obi-Wan, and you have your Rey and Finn and Poe, and kind of Kylo. And if you want to get really spicy, you have your Anakin and Obi-Wan and Ahsoka. And sure, you have some outliers. Darth Vader, or Palpatine, or Boba, or the droids. But there's one thing every character I just listed has in common. You get 3+ movies to get to know them. Yeah, sure, some are better developed than others. But There's something special about getting to spend time with a character, to think about them during their off-season, even to theorize about their characterization. For all intents and purposes, Bucky Barnes has no personality, at least any that remains from his first appearance. That didn't stop him from being my favorite Avenger for an incredibly long time. The time invested in more than one movie makes you care more, even if you don't know it. So asking people to only care about these characters for one movie was a shock, especially in a series where each character gets 3 movies minimum. And not just that, but the screen time had to be split between like 9 named characters, and you're expected to care over and over when each of them dies in the end. When K2 died, I thought that maybe that would be it. When Bodhi and Chirrut died, I thought, okay, this is a gritty war movie. Maybe they just needed a few more to hammer at home. When Baze died, I was almost heartbroken, and then there was Jyn and Cassian. Jyn and Cassian, who had functioned as our main characters for the entire movie. This was a Disney movie now. Surely the Mouse House couldn't be so bold. I don't think anyone batted an eye when Padme died. I don't think anyone was actually affected by her funeral scene in Revenge of the Sith. I still get shivers when Jyn and Cassian hug and disappear in that whiteout. Ladyknightthebrave did a really wonderful video about this movie where she talks about how the look Diego Luna gives right before the screen fades to white is haunting. And she couldn't be more right. Despite only having 2 hours to care about these characters, it mattered to me more than Padme, more than Han, more than Kylo, or even Luke. All of those character deaths were moving, some more than others.
She's dying.
We don't know why. She has lost the will to live.
But none of them ever beat out a single one of the main cast from Rogue One. The only Star Wars character whose death has ever gotten me so good was, well, so here's one of my last couple of hot takes for this video. I love Anakin Skywalker. I loved making fun of him in the prequels, I really loved him in the Clone Wars, and I loved him as a villain in the original trilogy. He is up there with my favorites. So when I heard he was going to be in the movie, I was like, oh, cool. Maybe we'll get some fun lightsaber stuff. I can't lie, I'm not immune to fan service. It's for us, after all. So when that screen went to white and I was like, oh, the movie must be over. And then we got Darth Vader going absolutely buck wild and mowing down these fools. It was, wow. I mean, chills. Still, chills. I'm going to talk about one of the last bits in Jedi Fallen Order, so go ahead and skip to this part of the video if you don't want to be spoiled. There's this scene at the very end of Fallen Order where Darth Vader shows up absolutely out of nowhere, and it rules because he becomes the final boss and you have to essentially collapse an entire tunnel just to get away from him. But it doesn't get me as good as the hallway fight in the end of Rogue One because, yeah, I got to fight Darth Vader, but in that scene, he's not getting fought. He's wiping the floor with these poor guys and they don't even stand a chance. It's absolutely epic. It gives me a new appreciation for him as a villain because this is the only time that we get to see him at the absolute height of his power. In all of his other fights, because of the technical limitations of when the original series was made, we get good fights, yeah, but we don't get people being pulled to the ceiling and rammed through with a lightsaber over and over. It makes you recontextualize the entire first scene of A New Hope because Leia's entire crew just witnessed this absolute reckoning, and they just kept going. Hope. So why does it matter? I talked a lot about the individual things I liked about this movie, but why do I put it before all 10 other Star Warses? I said at the beginning of the video that I didn't love Star Wars growing up. I watched them, sure, and I thought that the Ewoks were cute, but I didn't even see Empire until I was like 15. The Star Wars I grew up with was Clone Wars and then later the sequel trilogy. And then I watched this one and I got it. Or maybe not the entirety of it, but kind of. I saw the reason to love a world that already had an existing history and extensive mythos. I finally got the horror of a weapon blowing up an entire planet. I had grown up at a point where Darth Vader had already become Luke's father. I wasn't alive when he was nothing but a faceless bad guy, but watching this movie made me understand why he was so scary. Rogue One isn't Star Wars for people who grew up with Star Wars. It's for kids like me who grew up with it already existing in pop culture. I knew the phrase, "I am your father," before I ever saw Empire, because I'd seen it referenced in cartoons or other media. I watched Anna Kendrick pick apart why the movies were dumb and pitch perfect before I ever even watched them for myself. There's this weird phenomenon for kids in my generation where movies like Star Wars or Indiana Jones or Jaws or Beauty and the Beast don't have the same punch because we didn't grow up with them. We grew up after them. And in comparison to things that we're newly getting to claim, it's just not as good. A New Hope was a technological marvel for its time, and now that I care about it, I can appreciate that, but for my friends who have never even seen the whole original trilogy, it simply doesn't compare. It's old school. Rogue One is a modern movie made in an existing universe. It knows that audiences are getting progressively more interested in complex topics, and so it's a pretty war movie set in a universe so many people already love. I got into Star Wars because this movie made me fall in love with characters in 2 hours, so I wanted to see what they could do in 3 movies. I wanted to consume more of the universe because this movie made me hungry to see the rebellion win in a way I'd never wanted before. Even though almost none of these characters are present in other Star Wars movies, I wanted to watch the other ones just to get more from this galaxy. I love this movie because it made me love Star Wars.